स्वामिने तापहारिणे। नमस्कार। आज 11 সেপ্টেম্বর 2022। আজ থেকে ঠিক 130 বছর আগে এই দিনটিতে স্বামীজি শিকাগো শহরে বিশ্বের যে প্রথম ধর্ম সম্মেলনে বক্তব্য রেখেছিলেন। দিব্যায়ন দ্বারা আয়োজিত যে শিকাগো বক্তৃতার অনুষ্ঠান হচ্ছে সেটাও কিন্তু আজকে দিব্যায়নের এই 30তম প্রচেষ্টা। স্বামী বিবেকানন্দের শিকাগো বক্তৃতা শুধুমাত্র স্বামী বিবেকানন্দের দ্বারা কৃত নয়, মূলত শ্রীরামকৃষ্ণ এবং মা সারদা চেয়েছিলেন ভারতবর্ষের কথা, ভারতের প্রাজ্ঞ, ভারতবর্ষের দর্শন, ধর্ম, সংস্কৃতি সারা পৃথিবীর মানুষকে সত্যের আলো দেখা। সেই উদ্দেশ্যেই তারা স্বামীজিকে ভারতবর্ষ থেকে আমেরিকায় পাঠিয়েছিলেন। শ্রীরামকৃষ্ণ ব্যক্তিগতভাবে দেখিয়েছেন তুমি ওদিকে চলো, আর মা তিনি লিখে পাঠিয়েছেন হ্যাঁ তুমি যাও আমেরিকা। শিকাগো শহরের যে কথা স্বামীজি বলেছেন সে কথা কি? বিশ্ব ধর্ম সম্মেলনে বলেছেন মানুষের একাত্মতা। যে একাত্মতার কথা আমরা ভারতবর্ষের অতি প্রাচীন কাল থেকে পাই। কিরাম? ঋগ্বেদ থেকে পাই, শুক্ল যজুর্বেদ থেকে পাই। কি লেখাটি ছিল? শ্রীরন্ত বিশ্বে অমৃতস্য পুত্রা আজ ঘামানি দিব্যাংশ। বলছেন পৃথিবীতে সবাই, এই বিশ্বে সবাই অমৃতের পুত্র, কেউ ছোট নও, কেউ বড় নও, সবাই এসো। তাহলে এখানে জাতিভেদ, ধর্মে ভেদ কিছু নেই, সব সমান, সবাইকে এক হতে বলছেন। তারপর আমরা এই সম্মেলনের কথা আবার পাই উপনিষদে, গীতাতে। গীতার কথাটি স্বামীজি তার শিকাগো বক্তৃতার প্রথম দিনের বক্তব্যের মধ্যে বলেছেন যে যথা মাং প্রপদ্যন্তে স্থানস্ততৈব ভজাম্যহং মম বর্তানুবর্তন্তে মনুষ্যা পার্থ সর্বস্ব। কেউ আলাদা নয়। আমরা তারপরে দেখুন আসুন শঙ্কর, শ্রী চৈতন্য মহাপ্রভু সবাই মানুষকে আপন করে নিচ্ছেন। কোনো জাতিভেদ নেই, সম্প্রদায়গত বিভেদ নেই, ধর্ম নেই, রং নেই, শুধু মানুষ মানুষ মানুষ। তারপর শ্রীরামকৃষ্ণের শিক্ষা যখন স্বামীজি বহন করে নিয়ে গেলেন তিনি সেই একই কথা বলছেন। শিকাগো ধর্ম সম্মেলনের কথা বলতে গেলে আমি একটি কথা বলবো, স্বামী বিবেকানন্দ তার কোনো বক্তব্যতেই বা কোনো লেখাতে ভারতবর্ষের শাস্ত্রের বাইরে গিয়ে কিছু বলেননি। যেমন আপনি যদি জিজ্ঞেস করেন শিকাগো বক্তৃতার কথা, তাহলে বলতে হবে যে আমাদের গীতার ৫ম অধ্যায়ের ১৮ নম্বর শ্লোক, বিদ্যা বিনয় সম্পন্নে ব্রহ্মণে কবিহস্তিনী শুনি চৈব সপাকেচ পণ্ডিতা সমদর্শিন। এই কথাটিকে আপনি ম্যাগনিফাই করবেন, বারবার ম্যাগনিফাই করুন। শিকাগো বক্তৃতার প্রথম দিনে বক্তব্য দেখুন, বা প্রথম থেকে ৬টা বক্তব্য সবকটাকেই আপনি এটাকে লাগিয়ে ম্যাগনিফাই করুন। দেখুন যে স্বামীজি যা কথা বলছেন সেটা ভারতের আধ্যাত্ম শাস্ত্রের কথা, নিজের কথা বলছেন না। শ্রীরামকৃষ্ণের কথা বলছেন, নিজের কথা বলছেন না। এই কথাতেই আজকে আমাদের কাছে যে আবৃত্তিটা আপনারা শুনবেন সেটা হচ্ছে ভারত তীর্থ। 1893 সালে যে কথাটা স্বামীজি ওখানে বলেছেন তার থেকে 18 বছর পরে বিশ্বকবি রবীন্দ্রনাথ ঠাকুর বলছেন, এসো এসো আর্য এসো অনার্য, সবাইকে ডাকছেন। ভারতবর্ষ তো সেই কথাটাই সবাইকে গ্রহণ করেছে। স্বামীজি বারবার বলছেন সহিষ্ণুতা, সহিষ্ণুতা, ভারতবর্ষের কথা। এর মধ্যে কোনো কাউকে তিনি ত্যাগ করছেন না। বিশ্বের যাবতীয় নিপীড়িত মানুষদের আবাসস্থল ছিল, আশ্রয়স্থল ছিল ভারতবর্ষ। এখন আজকের দিনে এই ভারতবর্ষের কথা বলবার জন্য আমাদের মধ্যে উপস্থিত হবেন স্বামী মেঘানন্দজি মহারাজ, যার ব্রহ্মচর্য জীবনের নাম ছিল অয়ন মহারাজ। অয়ন মহারাজের সম্বন্ধে বা স্বামী বিবেকানন্দজির সম্বন্ধে ওই অঞ্চলটির যিনি সঞ্চালিকা শ্রীমতী চন্দ্রিকা সিংহ তিনি আপনাদের কাছে উপস্থাপন করবেন। আমি সেই জন্য সেখানে গেলাম না, কিন্তু শুধু সাবজেক্টটা আপনাদের কাছে আমি বলতে পারি যে বিষয়ের উপর স্বামীজি বলবেন সেটা হচ্ছে কসমোপলিটান। হ্যাঁ, এইটাই তো ঠিক, আমরা সবাই এক, এই কথাটাই আজকের দিনে তিনি বিশদভাবে ব্যাখ্যা করে বলবেন। আপনারা সবাই শুনবেন। আপনাদের কাছে অনুরোধ, এই ব্যাখ্যাটা আপনাদের বন্ধু বান্ধব সবার কাছে পৌঁছে দেবেন, এই আমাদের ইচ্ছে। স্বামীজি শিকাগো বক্তৃতার একটি বই রামকৃষ্ণ মিশন থেকে বিক্রি হয় মাত্র 10 টাকা দাম। আপনার অনুরোধ, এই বইটা খুলে পড়ুন, খুলে দেখুন, যেটা স্বামী বিবেকানন্দজি বলবেন বা ভারতবর্ষের কথা বা গীতার কথা তার সঙ্গে থেকে ম্যাগনিফাই করুন, আপনি সমৃদ্ধ হবেন। নমস্কার।
কেহ নাহি জানে কারাও ভানে কত মানুষের ধারা, দুর্বার স্রোতে এলো কোথা হতে সমুদ্রে হলো হারা। হেথায় আর্য, হেথা অনার্য, হেথায় দ্রাবিড় চীন, সব হুন্দল পাঠান মোগল এক দেখে হলো লীন। পশ্চিমে আগেই খুলিয়াছে দ্বার, সেটা হতে সবে আনে উপহার। দিবে আর নিবে, মিলাবে মিলিবে, যাবে না ফিরে এই ভারতের মহামানবের সাগর তীরে। এসো হে আর্য, এসো অনার্য, হিন্দু মুসলমান, এসো এসো আজ তুমি ইংরাজ, এসো এসো খ্রিস্টান। এসো ব্রাহ্মণ সূচি করি মন, ধরো হাত সবাকার। এসো হে পতিত, হোক অপনীত সব অপমান ভার। মার অভিষেকে এসো এসো তারা, মঙ্গল ঘট হয়নি যে ভরা। সবার পরশে পবিত্র করা তীর্থ নিরে, আজি ভারতের মহামানবের সাগর তীরে।
Sisters and brothers of America, it fills my heart with joy unspeakable to rise in response to the warm and cordial welcome which you have given us. I thank you in the name of the most ancient order of monks in the world. I thank you in the name of the mother of religions. And I thank you in the name of millions and millions of Hindu people of all classes and sects. My thanks also to some of the speakers on this platform who, referring to the delegates from the Orient, have told you that these men from far-off nations may well claim the honor of bearing to different lands the idea of toleration. I am proud to belong to a religion which has taught the world both tolerance and universal acceptance. We believe not only in universal toleration, but we accept all religions as true. I am proud to belong to a nation which has sheltered the persecuted and the refugees of all religions and all nations of the earth. I am proud to tell you that we have gathered in our bosom the purest remnant of the Israelites who came to southern India and took refuge with us in the very year in which their holy temple was shattered to pieces by Roman tyranny. I am proud to belong to the religion which has sheltered and is still fostering the remnant of the grand Zoroastrian nation. I will quote to you, brethren, a few lines from a hymn which I remember to have repeated from my earliest boyhood and which is every day repeated by millions of human beings. As the different streams, having their sources in different places, all mingle their water in the sea, so, O Lord, the different paths which men take through different tendencies, various though they appear, crooked or straight, all lead to Thee. The present convention, which is one of the most august assemblies ever held, is in itself a vindication, a declaration to the world of the wonderful doctrine preached in the Gita. Whoever comes to me, through whatsoever form I reach them, all are struggling through paths which in the end lead to me. Sectarianism, bigotry, and its horrible descendant, fanaticism, have long possessed this beautiful earth. They have filled the earth with violence, drenched it often and often with human blood, destroyed civilization, and sent whole nations to despair. Had it not been for these horrible demons, human society would be far more advanced than it is now. But their time is come, and I fervently hope that the bell that tolled this morning in honor of this convention may be the death knell of all fanaticism, of all persecutions with the sword or with the pen, and of all uncharitable feelings between persons wending their way to the same goal.
नमः श्रीयतिराजाय विवेकानन्दसूरये सच्चित्सुखस्वरूपाय स्वामिने तापहारिणे. Namaste. We have gathered here today to observe the historic occasion of 130th anniversary of Swami Vivekananda's Chicago address at the First World Parliament of Religions in 1893. On this day, Yugacharya Swamiji carried to the West India's ancient message of universal harmony and fundamental unity of all beings, which has been passed down from the Vedas, Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and reinforced by his beloved Guru, Yugavatar Swami Sri Ramakrishna. Today, we are honored to welcome among us most distinguished guest, Swami Medhananda, also known to many of us as Ayun Maharaj. Maharaj is a monk of Ramakrishna order and is presently a senior research fellow in philosophy at the Vedanta Society of Southern California. His current research focuses on Vedantic philosophical traditions, global philosophy of religion, cosmopolitan approaches to consciousness, and the philosophies of Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, and Sri Aurobindo. He is an academician of extraordinary intellectual acumen and has earned his PhD from the UC Berkeley. He has published over 30 articles and authored 3 books, among which is the path-breaking book Infinite Paths to Infinite Reality, Sri Ramakrishna and Cross-Cultural Philosophy of Religion, and his recently published book Swami Vivekananda's Vedantic Cosmopolitanism. On behalf of Dibyayan Yoga Research Center, I cordially invite Swami Medhananda Maharaj to speak on Swami Vivekananda's Vedantic cosmopolitanism in the light of Swamiji's Chicago address.
Thank you so much, Siddhanta, for inviting me today and for the very generous introduction. And thank you all for attending. This is a very auspicious day on which I'm speaking, so I'm honored to be speaking today on the 130th anniversary of Swamiji's Chicago address. You know, many monks have given many speeches on Swamiji's views on the harmony of religions, and I don't want to repeat what they have said. So I want to say something a little bit different and a little bit new, and possibly a little bit provocative in the short time that I have. So what I want to make a case for is that Swami Vivekananda's views on the harmony of religions actually evolved in the course of his thinking in the 1890s. And that the first phase of his thinking was starting with the Chicago Address in 1893. And that first phase lasted until March of 1894. So we can date this first phase, this phase one, from September 1893 to March 1894, just about 6 months. In this first phase, Swamiji very clearly taught the harmony of all religions. And I'll give you an example of one of his famous statements. He quoted the Shiva Mahimna Stotra. He says, this is on his very first address in Chicago on 11th September. He said, he quoted the 7th verse of the Shiva Mahimna Stotra. As the different streams having their sources in different places all mingle their water in the sea, so, O Lord, the different paths which men take through different tendencies, various though they appear, crooked or straight, all lead to thee. So he makes many such statements, beautiful statements, in his Chicago addresses. What we find in these Chicago addresses is that he very clearly is following his Guru Sri Ramakrishna in teaching the harmony of all religions. But he also makes some very interesting statements about what he calls the universal religion. In Bangla, we would say Sanatan Dharma. Swamiji makes some very interesting remarks on the universal religion in his paper on Hinduism, also delivered in Chicago at about the same time. I'll read it fairly slowly because I want you to carefully listen to it, and then we'll talk about it. He says, the Hindu may have failed to carry out all his plans, but if there is ever to be a universal religion, it must be one which will have no location in place or time, which will be infinite like the God it will preach, and whose sun will shine upon the followers of Krishna and of Christ, on saints and sinners alike, which will not be Brahminic or Buddhistic, Christian or Mohammedan, but the sum total of all these, and still have infinite space for development, which in its catholicity will embrace in its infinite arms and find a place for every human being, from the lowest groveling savage not far removed from the brute, to the highest man towering by the virtues of his head and heart, almost above humanity, making society stand in awe of him and doubt his human nature. It will be a religion which will have no place for persecution or intolerance in its polity, which will recognize divinity in every man and woman, and whose whole scope, whose whole force will be created in aiding humanity to realize its own true divine nature. This is what Swamiji says about the universal religion, and what I want to bring your attention to is the fact that he clearly says here that the universal religion does not yet exist. He says Hinduism points in the direction of a universal religion, but it does not yet exist. That's why in the whole passage he says this universal religion will be like this, it will be like that. Not that it is this and is that, will be. So please keep that in mind. Now, this is a very brief discussion of something I've discussed in great detail in the 3rd chapter of my new book, which she just mentioned, Swami Vivekananda's Vedantic Cosmopolitanism. In the third chapter, I discussed this in detail. So if you're interested in more details and more nuance, please look at that third chapter of my new book. But I'm just going to give a brief summary. So now, in this first phase of Swamiji's thinking, number one, he clearly taught the harmony of all religions. But number two, he was sort of groping toward or sort of moving toward a universal religion which does not yet exist. This was his position in this first phase of his thinking. This position lasted until March of 1894. After that, his view changed. And this is something which, as far as I'm aware, nobody has noticed. His view changed twice more in his lifetime, just in the next few years. And I want to explain in a bit more detail what these second and third phases in his views on the harmony of religions are. So the second phase, I date from September 1894 to May 1895. And there are two things that are very interesting about the second phase. Number one, during the second phase, Swamiji no longer claims that the universal religion does not yet exist. He says it does exist. This universal religion already exists in the form of Vedanta. He never talked about Vedanta in the first phase. You'll notice he only talks about Vedanta starting in the second phase. And he says that Vedanta is the universal religion. However, he says something more. How does he explain Vedanta in the second phase? He explains this universal religion of Vedanta in terms of the three stages of Vedanta: Dvaita, dualism, followed by Vishishtadvaita, the second stage, which is qualified non-dualism, and the highest stage being Advaita Vedanta. And so in the second phase of Swamiji's thought, he harmonizes the world religions on the basis of a Vedantic universal religion. And he explains this Vedantic universal religion in terms of these three stages: Dvaita, leading to Vishishtadvaita, culminating in Advaita. You might ask, where does he do this? What is your proof, Maharaj? The proof is, please look at, I'll just mention briefly, 4 sources. These are the 4 sources I found from this time period, from September 1894 to May 1895, where he explains the harmony of religions in terms of this Vedantic universal religion of the 3 stages. First, he wrote the reply to the Madras Address, written in September 1894. This is in volume 4 of the complete works, the Mayavati edition. And in 2 lectures in the same time period, he gave a lecture called The Religions of India, delivered in New York on 30th December 1894. And he gave another lecture on 8th March 1895 called Soul, God, and Religion, delivered in Connecticut in the US. And finally, his the last place that I have found where he discusses this harmony of religions in this way, in terms of the second phase, is in a letter written to his disciple Alasinga Perumal, dated 6th May 1895. And I want to read from that letter. It's a very interesting letter. This is what Swamiji says to Alasinga Perumal on May 6th, 1895. Listen very carefully. Swamiji says, all of religion is contained in Vedanta. That is, in the 3 stages of the Vedanta philosophy, the Dvaita, Vishishtadvaita, and Advaita. One comes after the other. These are the 3 stages of spiritual growth in man. Each one is necessary. This is the essential of religion. The Vedanta, applied to the various ethnic customs and creeds of India, is Hinduism. The first stage, i.e. Dvaita, applied to the ideas of the ethnic groups of Europe, is Christianity. As applied to the Semitic groups, Mohammedanism. The Advaita, as applied in its yoga perception form, is Buddhism, etc. So notice that what Swamiji is saying, he had never talked about this in the first phase, in the Chicago addresses. He's saying that all of the world religions can be harmonized on the basis of the universal religion of Vedanta. What is Vedanta? Vedanta consists in these 3 stages: Dvaita, Vishishtadvaita, and Advaita. And each of the world religions corresponds to one or more of these 3 stages. And he places Christianity and Islam on at the lowest stage, saying that they correspond to dualism. He doesn't put anybody at the Vishishtadvaita stage. And then in the Advaita stage, he places Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism in its Yogachara form. Most likely he meant Yogachara Buddhism. And then he says, Everybody has to pass through all three of these stages. So now remember this, that in the second phase of his thinking, he accepted the harmony of all religions, but now he's harmonizing the world religions using a hierarchy, a Vedantic hierarchy with Advaita as the highest and putting bhakti devotional religions on a lower footing. They're lower stages leading to the highest goal of Advaita Vedanta. Now you might wonder, is this a bit unfair to the devotional traditions, the bhakti traditions? And I think he himself was worried about this. I think he thought deeply about this. I think he reflected more on Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. How did Sri Ramakrishna teach the harmony of religions? Did Sri Ramakrishna put bhakti on a lower footing than jnana? And so I think he's constantly thinking about these things. And so after this letter to Alasinga Perumal, you don't find a single mention again. So, I mean, after May 1895, all the way up to the end of his life, he passed away in 1902. He was giving lectures up until 1900, 1901. You will not find a single further reference in Swamiji's lectures on the harmony of religions where he harmonizes the religions on the basis of this hierarchy of the three stages, Dvaita, Vishtadvaita, and Advaita. Instead, he moves into a different final phase in his thinking. This is what I call phase 3. Phase 3, this is his final and mature position on the harmony of religions. This lasts all the way from late 1895 all the way up to 1901. To begin in late 1895 all the way up to the end of his life, Swamiji teaches the harmony of all religions, not on the basis of the three stages of Vedanta, but in terms of the 4 yogas. This is very important. And I'll explain that briefly, what I mean in a second. Just please keep it. So phase 1, let me remind you, he already taught the harmony of religions, but he said the universal religion does not yet exist. I don't quite know how to explain how all the different religions can lead to the same goal. He's moving in that direction, but he didn't find the universal basis of all religions at that time, at that early point in his thinking. In the second phase, he claims, I found it. I found the basis of the harmony of all religions. That basis is the Vedantic theory of 3 stages. Dvaita leading to Vishtadvaita, leading to Advaita, because I can show that every world religion corresponds to one or more of these stages. But the problem with that is that there's a kind of hierarchy. And he's placing Advaita on a higher footing than the Bhakti traditions, than the devotional traditions. So that's why he moves to, or I think that's one of the reasons he moves toward the final position, which is that there is a universal religion on the basis of which we can appreciate the harmony of all religions. That basis is Vedanta. That universal religion is Vedanta. But we should not understand Vedanta in terms of the 3 stages of Dvaita, Vishtadvaita, and Advaita. We should understand Vedanta in the sense of the 4 yogas. Before I explain what I mean by these 4 yogas, let me first mention briefly. You might ask, where does he talk about this? He talks about it in many, many lectures. Too many lectures for me to mention now. You can please look at the references in my chapter 3 of my new book. I'll mention just a few of them. He has an essay written in, the date is not known, but it was written between 1895 and 1896, most likely. The essay is called 4 Paths of Yoga. He gave a lecture, which in the complete works is called My Master, on Sri Ramakrishna in fall 1896. He talks about the universal religion there. He has a lecture called The Ideal of Universal Religion, given on 4th March 1896. And there are many, many other lectures like this. Please look at my book for more details. Now, what does he say in these lectures? He says, this is, first, let me put it this way. Now, how does Swamiji, in this final period of his thinking, this final phase, the 3rd phase, how does he prove that all of the different world religions lead to the same goal and that they are equally effective? His argument proceeds in 3 steps. The first step is this. He argues that every world religion corresponds to one or more of the 4 yogas. What are these 4 yogas? Most of you will know this, I hope. Jnana yoga is the yoga of knowledge. Bhakti yoga is the yoga of devotion, the yoga of worship. Raja yoga is the yoga of meditation and concentration and mysticism. And Karma Yoga is the yoga of selfless action, selfless works. These are the 4 yogas, which Swamiji talks about in detail in his lectures and in his writings. What Swamiji says, the first step in his argument for the harmony of religions in this final phase of his thinking is to claim that every one of the world religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, and so many others, corresponds to one or more of these 4 yogas. He says this, for instance, in his lecture on Sri Ramakrishna, delivered in 1896. This is a direct quotation. Swamiji says, a man may be intellectual or devotional or mystic or active. The various religions represent one or the other of these types. Intellectual means Jnana Yoga, devotional means Bhakti Yoga, mystic means Raja Yoga, active means Karma Yoga. Each, what does he say? The various world religions represent one or the other of these 4 temperaments: intellectual, devotional, mystic, or active. Okay? Second argument, second step in his argument. Swamiji argues that each of the 4 yogas is equally capable of leading us to the highest goal of salvation. Let me give you one example where he says this very clearly. Swamiji says, each one of our yogas is fitted to make man perfect, even without the help of the others, because they have all the same goal in view. The yogas of work, Karma Yoga, of wisdom, Jnana Yoga, and of devotion, Bhakti Yoga, are all capable of serving as direct and independent means for the attainment of moksha. And you might say, an attentive listener might say, wait a minute, he only mentions 3 yogas in this passage. What happened to, we have Karma Yoga, we have Bhakti Yoga, we don't have Raja Yoga here. He talks about Raja Yoga in many other places, and he, in other places, for instance, in the beginning of Raja Yoga, he mentions all 4 of the yogas equally capable of taking us to the highest goal. So that's a small note. So first step in his argument, every world religion corresponds to one or more of the 4 yogas. Second step in his argument, each of these 4 yogas is equally capable of taking us to the goal of salvation. Third step, third and final step, therefore, since each yoga has equal effectiveness in leading to salvation, and each of the major world religions corresponds to one of these yogas, that means by logical necessity, all of these world religions are equally capable of leading to salvation. This is the basic argument in a nutshell. Where does he make this third claim? He says, for instance, in his lecture on Sri Ramakrishna, he says that each religion, quote, has the same saving power as the other. He says it very clearly here. Now, what is the difference between his final view and the view in the second phase? He does not claim that every religion has the same saving power in the second phase, because remember that there is a hierarchy, and he was claiming that theistic religions, bhakti religions, are on a lower footing. They were at the Dvaita stage or the Vishtadvaita stage, but that only Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism were on the highest Advaitic plane. So they're not equally effective. There's a kind of hierarchy of higher and lower, which he abandons in his mature position, beginning in late 1895, all the way up to the end of his life. Now, then there's this question. Why do you think that he abandoned his second phase position? We've already talked about this to some extent, but I just want to reiterate it. I believe most likely this is because he realized that this second position, this phase 2 view, is not as liberal as his guru's view. It's not fair to put devotional traditions on a lower footing than the non-devotional traditions, Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism. And he felt that this is not true to the spirit of my guru's teachings. This is just speculative. This is my own theory, and I discuss it in some detail in my book. But I want you to think for yourselves. Why do you think that Swamiji changed his view and abandoned this hierarchical, this view that some religions correspond to Dvaita, Vishtadvaita, other religions correspond to the highest phase? But I believe that Swamiji thought about it and decided that it's not good to bring in this hierarchy. And finally, I want to conclude, because one of the themes of this meeting today is Swamiji's cosmopolitanism. I wanted to explain briefly how Swamiji's doctrine of the harmony of religions provides the basis for a very genuine and very valuable kind of religious cosmopolitanism. What do I mean by that? Let me begin by mentioning briefly that in academic circles, in the philosophy of religion, there are these three different terms that are very commonly used to describe different paradigms for understanding how the different world religions relate to one another. One of these terms is exclusivism, the other is inclusivism, and the third is pluralism. Exclusivism is the view that only my religion is true, or in other formulations, only my religion leads to salvation. Other religions are false, or they do not lead to salvation. This is exclusivism. The second position is called inclusivism. This is the view that my religion is the highest. Other religions are not completely wrong, but they are lower than my religion. Notice that Swamiji held an inclusivist position in the second phase of his thinking. Advaitic inclusivism, because he put Advaita on the highest footing and he put devotional traditions on a lower footing. So Swamiji in the second phase was a kind of religious inclusivist. But in his first and his third phases, he moves away from inclusivism to embrace religious pluralism. And what do philosophers mean by religious pluralism? What they mean is that multiple world religions are equally effective in taking us to the highest goal of salvation. There's no higher and lower. They're equally effective. Okay? That's religious pluralism. So it's very clear that in this final phase in Swamiji's thinking, he taught religious pluralism. But there is a further question here, okay? Because logically speaking, I can be a religious pluralist. I can believe that I'm a Hindu. And as a religious pluralist, I'll say that, but Muslims can also attain God realization through Islam, the path of Islam. Christians can also attain God realization through the path of Christianity. Buddhists can also attain the highest goal through the practice of Buddhism. But does that mean that I should practice Christianity and that I should practice Islam or that I should practice Buddhism? No. You see, I can be very liberal in my attitude and say, yes, you Christians are also on the right path. You Buddhists are also on the right path. You Muslims are also on the right path. But please leave me alone. I love Hinduism and I'll continue to practice Hinduism. This is not religious cosmopolitanism as Swamiji understood it. Swamiji goes further than religious pluralism. He goes much further than many of these Western philosophers who are talking about religious pluralism. He deepens religious pluralism into what I call a religious cosmopolitanism. And what I mean by that is he insists again and again that we must try to learn from religions other than our own. We should not just ignore other religions. We should not just think to ourselves that, oh, other religions are also good. No, we should actively try to learn from other religions. And we will be better spiritual aspirants by incorporating the insights and ideas and teachings of other religions into our own daily practice. So just to give you one example, this is a very beautiful passage. This is from his lecture called The Way to the Realization of a Universal Religion, given in 1900. Swamiji says, our watchword then will be acceptance and not exclusion. I accept all religions that were in the past and worship with them all. I worship God with every one of them in whatever form they worship him. I shall go to the mosque of the Mohammedan. I shall enter the Christian's church and kneel before the crucifix. I shall enter the Buddhistic temple where I shall take refuge in Buddha and in his law. I shall go into the forest and sit down in meditation with the Hindu who is trying to see the light which enlightens the heart of everyone. So there's a very stirring passage. And notice that in this passage, he is not just saying that I accept other religions, all religions as true and as effective. I actively will go into the Christian church and worship Christ. I will go into the mosque and worship with the Muslims. I will go into the Buddhistic temples and practice the Buddhist Eightfold, Noble Eightfold path and try to learn from these other religions. So this is what I mean by religious cosmopolitanism. Swamiji is so broad and we still have so much to learn from Swamiji in this age of, unfortunately, there's still so much religious violence and killing in the name of religion, different religions. So in the name of peace and harmony, let us pray to Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, and Holy Mother Sharada Devi, that we can all become true religious pluralists, and even more importantly, religious cosmopolitans, and love all religious paths as Sri Ramakrishna and Swamiji and Holy Mother loved them, and promote love in this world. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
Swamiji, if you are okay, then can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
So, this transition that you mentioned of Swamiji's transition from his phase 2 of putting Dvaita, Vishishtadvaita and Advaita to a third phase of moving to the 4 yogas, I would love if you can talk about the Vijnana Vedanta ideology that Sri Ramakrishna represents, that you mentioned in your book Infinite Past to Infinite Reality. That isn't it based on Thakur's experience and viewpoints, that the examples of the chameleon that he gives, and then the example analogy where he draws that when a sadhaka is going step by step on a building, he does not this neti vichara, and when he reaches the terrace, he sees that the terrace is the whole building is made of the same thing that the terrace is made up of. So isn't that the foundation of Swamiji's cosmopolitan?
Yes, that's an excellent question. So you've done your homework and you studied my previous book and you're making connections with my new book. So that's very good. Yes, exactly. So in my book, I mean, I'm talking now about my new book. I'm building on my previous book on Sri Ramakrishna, Infinite Paths to Infinite Reality. And what I try to show in my new book on Swamiji, in chapters 1 and 2 especially, is that Swamiji followed his Guru Sri Ramakrishna in teaching Vijnana Vedanta, except not using the term Vijnana. That's what's confusing to many people. He almost never used the term Vijnana in Thakur's sense. He used the term Advaita in countless places. So many people, when they read Swamiji, they think that he was basically a follower of Shankara and not so much a follower of Sri Ramakrishna. What I argue in the second chapter of my book is that Swamiji's Advaita Vedanta differs in substantial ways from the Advaita Vedanta of Shankaracharya, and basically is in line with Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta. And I try to show that systematically by quoting from Swamiji's lectures and many things. So what are the main doctrines of Vijnana Vedanta? Let me just rehearse some of the main ones. Number 1, what is the nature of God? God is not only nirguna, impersonal, attributeless, but also personal. Shakti, the personal God with attributes, with all the omni attributes, omniscience, omnipotence. That's the first thing. Jini nirgun tini shogun, he used to say. Brahma oshokti abhed. Swamiji teaches exactly the same thing. And this is what I call Swamiji's integral Advaita. This is Advaita Vedanta, but it's an integral Advaita which accepts the reality of Shakti and it accepts the reality of this world as a manifestation of Shakti. Number 2, so first doctrine, God is both impersonal and personal. This is the first doctrine of Swamiji's integral Advaita. Second doctrine is, what is the status of this world? Is it real or unreal? Swamiji says it is 100% real as a manifestation of God. In so many lectures, Swamiji talks about this. He says, don't make the mistake of thinking that Vedanta teaches that the world is unreal, that it denounces the world. He says, Vedanta teaches the deification of the world. He says this explicitly in a lecture called God in Everything. So notice all of this is Vijnana Bhava. Because Sri Ramakrishna used to say, Bigyani dekhe jini nirgun tini shogun. Bigyani dekhe brahmoy chaturvinshi tattva hoyechen. The Vijnani sees that divine reality, which is nirguna, is also saguna. The Vijnani sees that Brahman has become the 24 cosmic principles, everything in this world. And third and finally, and this is what comes directly, it's related to your question about cosmopolitanism and the different world religions. What does this have to do with spiritual practice? According to Shankara, only one yoga leads directly to moksha. That is Jnana Yoga. Everybody who studies Shankara knows this. Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga are not useless, but they are helpful at a lower stage to attain purity of mind. Ultimately, we have to give up those practices of karma yoga and bhakti yoga, practice jnana yoga, and then we attain moksha. But according to both Sri Ramakrishna and Swamiji's integral Advaita, each of the 4 yogas is a direct and independent path to the highest goal of salvation. So this is the direct link with. So yes, you're correct in noticing that the ultimate philosophical foundation of Swamiji's mature view, the 3rd phase doctrine of the harmony of religions, is this Vijnana Vedanta, or what I call Swamiji's integral Advaita philosophy. So that's a very good question. Thank you. I can't hear you, Siddhartha. You're muted. I think you're muted because I can't hear you.
Yes.
Yes, now you're unmuted.
Yes. So thank you so much, Maharaj. Thank you. On behalf of Dibyayan, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to you for giving us your time and enlightening us with such an erudite talk on this auspicious occasion. And we fervently hope to have you again with us in our future endeavors.
Thank you. I'd be happy to. Thank you so much.
Namaste.
Thank
Jai
you so much.
Ramakrishna. Jai Swamiji. Thank you, David. Take care.
Bye.